Alright, chapter 12 of book 1, Flight to the Ford. So we pick up where we left off with Frodo being stabbed by the Ringwraiths by a Morgul blade, specifically the Witch King. And so they find him lying face down. Aragorn has disappeared, and Sam begins to be suspicious of Strider again. But he comes back and explains to him, that he's not a Ringwraith, he's not in league with them, but he got this plant that was brought from Numenor called Athelas, which means King's Leaf. Lass being leaf in, I believe it is the Sindarin tongue of Elvish. And it's just, you see this name in Legolas, which means green leaf. So it's the same lass, Lego being green. And so they, Strider and the hobbits go on their way towards Rivendell. Now he had discovered that the blade that the Witch King had cut Frodo with, and a part of the tip is missing. And what happened was it broke off in the wound, and so it's working its way towards Frodo's heart, and he's slowly starting to turn into a Ringwraith. And so now he'll be able to see them. Because when he put on the ring, when they were approaching, he was able to see them. But now, without having the ring on, he'll be able to see them, since he's slowly turning into one of them. And you can see them from what they actually look like. And they end up crossing over another river called the Grey Flood, or the Myth Aethel as it is in Elvish, which flows south into the Grey Flood, or Gwathlo as it is called. Now here I'm going to turn to the Lord of the Rings companion again. They where they mention, of course, Etten. The Ettenmoors are mentioned in this chapter, which is where the river comes from. It flows out of Misty Mountains through the Ettendales. Etten means giant, because there's trolls living there. Trolls are gigantic. And it comes from Old English Eoten. Now, they say here about the Grey Flood. Grey Flood is a translation of Sindarin Gwathlo. Of this river, Tolkien writes at great length in The Rivers and Beacon Hills of Gondor. The river Gwathlo is translated Grey Flood, but Gwath is a Sindarin word for shadow in the sense of dim light owing to cloud or mist, or in deep valley. Now this portion was published originally in Unfinished Tales. It is also published in full in the journal called Vinyar Tangwar, which is a journal for the Elvish Linguistic Fellowship. And they published a lot of Tolkien's works on his languages, and then they go through some of the stuff that he himself published, like in Lord of the Rings, and of course what Christopher later published, and they analyze it, stuff like that. You can actually get those on Amazon. They have there's like 51 issues, but they have them in like a 5-volume set, basically. You can get on Amazon. I have one of them, and so I've read actually the Rivers and Beacon Hills of Gondor, which we are going to now return to. This does not seem to fit the geography. The wide lands divided by the Gwathlo into the regions called by the Númenóreans Minhiriath, between the rivers Barandwin and Gwathlo, and in Nidwaith, Middlefolk, were mainly plains, open and mountainless. At the point of the confluence of Glanduin and Myth Aethel, the land was almost flat, and the waters became sluggish and tended to spread into Finland. I don't know, I always say it like Finland, like the country, but that's, not it. But some 100 miles below Tharbad, the slope increased. The Gwathlo, however, never became swift, and ships of smaller draft could, without difficulty, sail or be rowed as far as Tharbad. And then it talks about how The name came from the Numenorians, who called it that because when they were exploring the area, as they were sailing up the river, they noticed that it was overshadowed by trees. And so they called it River of Shadow, Gwathir. And of course, they end up destroying all the trees and stuff that's in the land, and so at the time of Lord of the Rings, it's all grassland. Eriador was once blanketed in forests. It was pretty wide forest from like the Blue Mountains all the way down to the Misty Mountains. The southern end was basically what is now Fangorn. And I think he does mention somewhere the lands of Nidwaith and Minhiriath are not. There were people living there once, but I don't think that there are at this point. If there are, they're few and far between, and they're probably not having contact with the outside world. Kind of like what we have here in real world, in like places like the Amazon, where you have these tribes of people that you can't contact, or they've had no contact with the outside world. Now, this River Mythaethel was crossed by Bilbo and the dwarves in The Hobbit, and so they're now basically following Bilbo. The way, in the journey that he had in The Hobbit, they're going along the same path that he was. And so they discover the stone trolls and the troll cave and all that. Of course, at first they think Pippin and thinks that it's the real trolls, but it's like in the middle of the day, and of course trolls can't be out in broad daylight. They turn to stone. And this is where it does mention, where Bilbo had mentioned in The Hobbit about all the different ruined towers and stuff. I had mistakenly said that was in the last chapter, in another place on the Weather Hills, but the Weather Hills does have a similar thing. That was, I think, but on the border of what was once two of the kingdoms that Arnor was split into, Arthedain and Cardolan, and that was heavily disputed at that time. And of course, the third region is Rhudaur, which they are now in. And so there's also on the hills in the forest where the trolls were, which is on the map of Middle Earth listed as Troll Shaws. And of course, Sam sings a song about a stone troll, and Sam muttered something inaudible. "It's out of his own head, of course," said Frodo. "I am learning a lot about Sam Gamgee on this journey. First he was a conspirator, now he's a jester. He'll end up by becoming a wizard or a warrior." "I hope not," said Sam. "I don't want to be neither." And so they continue on, and they begin to hear hooves. So they're thinking, oh crap, here come the ring wraiths, right? But it turns out it is an elf. Now in the movie, the elf was Arwen that came to their rescue. In the animated movie, it was Legolas, but is a completely different elf in the book, and his name is Glorfindel, which you will remember we met a Glorfindel in the Silmarillion in the Fall of Gondor, or Gondolin, I'm sorry, who was slain, and I'm pretty sure it mentions it here in the Companion. So I'm gonna look at that. Oh, and before this, they ask Aragorn if he had been to Rivendell, and he says that's where his heart is. Obviously, a kind of a hint of what's coming. Well, his heart is there because his heart is Arwen, his girlfriend. But anyway, they meet Glorfindel, and which, like I said, was an elf in Gondolin. He was let's see if I can remember. Does it say in here? There was, in the original written full version of The Fall of Gondolin, there was an elf named Legolas, but it is not the same Legolas in Lord of the Rings, obviously. He did like to reuse names, and so he could have reused a name for an elf here, but this is the Glorfindel from the Silmarillion that died, and as you remember, if an elf dies, they can come back in their own they can come back into their own body. Now they usually stay in Valinor. Glorfindel did not. He went with Gandalf and Saruman and the wizards to Middle-earth when they came. Although Tolkien did kind of play around with the idea of maybe Glorfindel came in the Second Age, and maybe some of the wizards actually came in the Second Age, and all of them. There was no final... But if you read The Lord of the Rings, it seems like the final say on that was, yeah, the wizards came in the Third Age. And this is when Glorfindel would come. Yeah. It says here in The Companion, Tolkien concluded that Glorfindel must have returned to Middle-earth, probably circa Second Age 1600, when the power of Sauron had become great in response to urgent messages and prayers asking for help, received in Numenor and Valinor. And I forget how he died in the Silmarillion, which is what I was looking for. If I remember, he died trying to help the exiles, like the survivors, escape by fighting a Balrog. Which you're going to see the same thing happen in Book 2 here, but with a different character, of course. But anyway, he has Glorfindel. He tells them that Elrond had sent out riders to go look for them because Gildor and the elves, when that were in the Shire earlier, when the hobbits met them, had sent messages to Rivendell saying, "Hey, Gandalf's missing. The Black Riders are coming. Frodo might need help." And so here it is that Glorfindel found them. Glorfindel was also there when the North Kingdom fell, centuries earlier. And that's when the prophecy was spoken that, and I believe it was by Glorfindel, that not by the hand of man will the Witch King fall, as we will see in the Return of the King when we get there. So he puts Frodo on his horse, and then they continue on, and right when they're about to get to the ford, the Ringwraiths show up, who have not been seen in a while. Not since the attack on Weathertop have they been seen. And so they chase Frodo towards the river. And Frodo crosses over, and they begin to cross over. And you do hear them speak a little bit more than you do in the movie. And the line that they give is a completely different line in the movie than what it is here. And basically they say, come back to Mordor, we will take you. Frodo whispers, go back. And they say, the ring, the ring. And he shouts, by Elbereth and Luthien the Fair, you shall have neither me, the ring, nor me. And this is when the Witch King begins to advance, basically causes Frodo to stop just by, raising his hand. Says Witch King is a witch, after all. And, of course, a Ringwraith. And this is when you see the waters rise up against them, and they take on the form of white horses. As you will learn in the next chapter, Gandalf is the one that added that to it, but the flood itself was caused by Elrond. But it was Gandalf that made them look like, when it waters rise up, make it look like white horses, white riders on white horses. And so the horses are drowned, they're unmasked, and so they end up fleeing back to Mordor. And I'm sure when they get back there, Sauron's probably going to be pissed that they didn't bring the ring with them, that they failed in their mission. But he has a new mission for them, and he's going to give them new steeds on which to ride, and he's going to recloak them. And you will see them again, or at least one of them, before the Fellowship of the Ring ends. You will see one again. which you don't see in the movie, and I was kind of expecting that to happen, but I'll talk about that when I get to that chapter, which will be later, maybe next week or the week after. I mean, who knows when I'm going to get to that. And but Frodo, right before this happened, while this is happening, he does see a bright white light and some small dark figures behind the bright light with fire. This, of course, Frodo sees Glorfindel as he truly is a High Lord of the Elves, and of course, the shadows behind him are Strider and the Hobbits carrying torches, and they drive what is the few ring wraiths that remained behind into the river, and there you go. Ring wraiths are gone, but not defeated. They'll be back, like I said, and Frodo has now come to Rivendell finally. And there's even, of course, I got the illustrated edition here. And here's Tolkien, a picture that Tolkien painted of what Rivendell looks like. I'm going to show. So, that is Rivendell. Anyway, that is the end of Book 1. Now it's Book 2. And that's where I'll end it today. Video's a little bit longer than I was expecting, but there's a lot to cover here. And there's going to be a lot more to cover in the next chapter, so yeah, a lot's coming there. But anyway, that is all for now. I hope you all will enjoy this video, and I will talk to you all later.